prominent people came to speak, and I was hospitality chairman. And there was a dinner at the president of the university, Alexander Haig, who was the former
Secretary of State.
state secretary, the secretary of state, the former secretary of state was speaking, and his aide was sitting next to me, and he said, Meryl, what are you gonna do after you graduate school? And I said, I don't know, I'm just a sophomore. And he said, well, I think you would make a great agent. Okay, great. So he said he put me in touch with a woman at William Morris who maybe could help me. So he put me in touch with this woman, and she told me that they only hire the kids of the agents that work there for the summer in the mailroom. And I said, okay. At the end of the summer, I called personnel. It was called personnel, then I guess human resources now. And fortunately, I got this woman on the phone who had just started working there. So I asked her if I could have an informative interview, and she said yes. I went in there to meet with her and spoke with her, and she said to stay in touch, which I did. I studied in London first semester my junior year. My friend from that time is here today. And Lizzie, she owns a very successful commercial production company. And I studied in Florence the second semester. And I sent her postcards from my travels, just saying, hi, I'm having a great time here or there. I came home Christmas, I saw her, I said, anything open up? No, nothing's available for the summer. I went back to Florence, sent her more postcards. When I came home, nothing was available. So I went back to school, and I was in touch with her, and she told me, because again, she said, you need to have connections to work in the mailroom. So then she told me that I needed to know how to type. And I didn't know, I know it sounds crazy to you guys, but typing was like a course that they taught then. And I never took typing. So the Christmas break, my senior year of college, I took short method secretarial skills in the city every day for my Christmas break and learned how to type. When I came back to school, my friend said to me, well, where are you gonna work? What are you gonna do? And I said, oh, I'm gonna work at William Morris. I'm gonna work in the mailroom at William Morris. And they said, well, do you have the job? No, but I'm gonna work there. I'm gonna be a part. I know how to type now, so I can be a temp, and I don't care. That's what I'm gonna do. So I was in touch with this woman, and again, she kept saying that you need to have a connection. So I said to my parents, don't you have a connection? You must have a connection. And for those who are, I guess this is the synagogue group, the cantor at my temple was good friends with this guy who was an agent at William Morris. And I had a good relationship with the cantor because I'd gone to yeshiva when I was little, so I was the best bat mitzvah student he ever had. So I met with this guy, and they put me through the process, and I interviewed, and I got the job, and I was actually the second woman to ever be an agent trainee in the mailroom at William Morris in New York. So being relentless, I guess the lesson there is that to be relentless. And I don't think today that the thing about having connections and them saying that, if that's gone away, that they've really democratized the type of people that they hire at the agencies, and they've also increased the pay so that people of all different stations in life can work there, and it doesn't have to be just entitled kids with parents that are going to have to self-support them. When I was growing up, or when I was in the working world, we didn't have the internet, so we didn't know what was going on in entertainment. We didn't know to look at Variety, it's so sophisticated, the information that you guys have now, that we didn't have that. I mean, I actually had to memorize phone numbers to place phone calls. I didn't look it up. I know numbers by heart, because you had to know numbers by heart. We didn't have a computer. Let me see you also have to follow your instincts. When I decided to leave William Morris, I thought that I wasn't gonna, the reason I wanted to leave was because I felt that no matter how hard I worked, I wasn't gonna have any impact. And if I was gonna put everything into it, I wanted to see the fruits of my labor somehow or some way. So I decided to leave William Morris, but I had a cushion there. They're like, I can come back. And I had a lot of job opportunities as an assistant, or like a little bit above an assistant, and making like double the amount of money I'd been making at William Morris. Someone told me about a company named MERYL, and they just released Sex, Lies, and Videotape. I really didn't know anything about the company, and the office was disgusting. It was like tiny and desks on top of each other, but there was something and it was less money than I was offered for all these other jobs, but I don't know what it was. It was an instinct where I took the gig, and the company grew overnight. And when you're at a company, a nascent company like that, you get a tremendous opportunity. So that's also something that, working at a smaller place, not at such an established place, that you have a lot more opportunity. So I grew and grew at the company. I did everything when you're working at a company. So I learned every aspect of the business because I was thrown into it. No one really taught me, but you're just thrown into it and you learn. And again, no internet knowledge. And after being there 16 years and having Jed and Ava, I needed a break. And I took the summer off, and I thought, okay, I'm not going back to work for a long time. In that September, my daughter went to school on a bus, and I wasn't necessarily going on play dates with Jed. I had a nanny that had lived with us, and I was checking where my name was on a wait list for a pair of shoes, for a pair of Christian Louboutin shoes, and I realized I really have to go back to work. This is and there were a lot of people who had pursued me and had wanted to meet with me, and one of them was a guy who ran 20th Century Fox Film. And I said to him, I called him up and I said, okay, let's start talking. Now you have to understand, in those days, I mean, I sound like I'm antique. In those days, film and television was completely separate. And I think that it's very hard for you guys to understand that, but it really was completely separate. And when I was working at William Morris, the TV department was all men. And it was and when you work in the mailroom, you really do push a mail cart. And you try to get the cart for the floor that you want to work on. So I really didn't want to work in TV. It was all men. I wanted to work in talent. And that's just as an aside. So I was negotiating to take this job at Fox. I was going to be a film executive out of New York and working a lot with Europe because I made a lot of movies in London, in the UK. And I had dinner that night, one night, with Jeff Zucker and his wife, who were friends of ours, and he was the head of NBC Universal. So I said to him, I think I'm going to take this gig at Fox. And he said, well, why can't we work together? And I said, I never thought of it. And he said, can you come to my office tomorrow? And I said, yes. So I went there, and a big reason why I wanted to take the job is that I was used to being close to someone who had a lot of power. And the company was based in New York, NBC Universal, as opposed to Fox, which was based in Los Angeles. So, the guy, I thought he would hold it against me forever, but Tom Rothman, now he's the head of Sony, but I think he's okay now. And I took the job there. The only person I knew in television was an agent at CAA who ended up being the head of the TV department at CAA because he was an assistant when I was in the mailroom at William Morris, and that's how I knew him. And so he became my de facto agent, but I always thought outside the box, and I always thought about what I wanted, and I never looked at things like people would say. I would never say to NBC, oh, what are you looking for? I still don't do that. When someone says, when I have a project, if they say, where are you going to sell this? And I said, I don't know, I have to figure out the project, and then I'll figure out where I'm going to sell it. And I think that it's much better not to look to your left and not to look to your right, because it'll drive you absolutely crazy. You have to have your own belief in what you think, and it has to be singular in some ways in order to go forward. So when I was at NBC Universal, so I had a first look for TV and for movies, and I had gone to see a musical off Broadway called In the Heights. And I absolutely fell in love with it. Now, I had done the movie Chicago, which was the first musical that had been done in a very, very long time. And it was not an obvious decision to make. And actually, I was with a guy that I used to work with on Sunday, and he said, I can't believe, we were all like, I can't believe you're doing this. What do you do? I was like, I have to do it. I don't have a choice. I was told I have to make this movie. And I had no idea how to do it. And I would read, I know I've gone off, but I'll come back to In the Heights. And I would read the book of the play every week to understand what the themes were. And I would read about what was going on at the time. It took place in the 1920s and different stories. I really didn't understand what the story was that I was going to tell. And I couldn't go out and work with a writer or work with a director if I didn't know the story that I was going to tell. It took a very long time. It's a lot of starts and stops. I'm actually going to teach a course at Tulane next semester, the making of Chicago the musical, and you guys can audit it if you'd like and learn more about it. But I met tons and tons of directors, very big name directors, David Fincher and Curtis Hanson and Stanley Donen, who had directed Singing in the Rain. And there were so many versions of this. That one time Madonna was attached to it, Goldie Hawn was attached to it. There were a lot of different incarnations, and I couldn't decide on a director. And then one day an agent called me and he said, did you see Annie on television? I said, yeah, I did. And he said, I represent the director, Rob Marshall. Would you meet with him for Rent? At the time, I had bought Rent to make. I did not make that movie. I have nothing to do with that movie. But at the time, I had that. And I said, sure. Because Rob Marshall wasn't big enough to direct Chicago, but maybe he would be innovative enough that Rent was a kind of lower rent, kind of lower, you didn't have to have big stars in it as we would with Chicago. So Rob came in and he said to me, do you mind if I give you my take for Chicago? I said, no, go ahead. And he gave me his take, and he told me, for those who've seen the movie, that you go through Roxy's eye, and she sees herself on stage, and that's the structure of the storytelling, is that they envision themselves on stage, so that would allow them to break out into song and dance. And when I heard that, I knew it. And again, you just know. You know, it's like when you read something and it's funny, you laugh. If you have to think, is this funny? It's probably not. And he was a very charming personality. I knew that he would be able to carry big names. I knew that they would respect him, and I really believed in him and backed him 100% into doing it. And you know, for those of you who've seen the movie, know what the outcome was. But I have to say, it was. No one knew about making a movie musical, and because I'm going to teach this course, I just got all my old files and I'm reading it. It's like, oh my God, it's insane what went on with this, getting the rights and all different it was so much. It was really a lot. And so I had the ability to do a musical. I'd done it successfully, and I'd been offered musicals as when I was at NBC Universal, but nothing appealed to me. The movies that I was offered to produce musicals, and when I saw In the Heights, it was a no-brainer to me. They said that they weren't going to sell the rights yet before it moved to Broadway. Every time there was something else. So again, in my relentless style, I went to the show. I saw the show 28 times, and I think Jed saw the show at least 2 times. You saw the show 2 times.
Too many.
And I would bring famous people to the show to show them that I could cast it and I could do a good job. And I brought Jennifer Lopez, I brought America Ferrara, I brought the guy, he was like such a big deal at the time from Big Time Rush. And,
Carlos Penavega. Carlos Penavega.
Carlos Pena. Oh, Demi Lovato became our best friend. We saw Demi tons of times. And so I really rallied to get the rights to it. And you can't just rest on your laurels. I mean, I really had to fight to get it. And I still had a studio backing. Universal said that they would buy it for me. So we made the deal, and the studio made me hire a director that I really didn't believe in. And there were reasons that they wanted him. He was Hispanic, and it was a Hispanic story. But that's really not enough of a reason. And ultimately, the movie fell apart. And I was very upset and devastated. I worked very hard for many years in getting it made, and I did not make the movie that was ultimately made. And but you have to really stand by what you believe in, and I think that that's a lesson that is part of my advice with what you create. And in fact, I'm making a new podcast that's kind of racy. I'm a little bit embarrassed to tell you what it's about, but it's for iHeart, and in the process, I'm working with people who haven't had a fraction of the experience I've had. And there are producers from iHeart who really kind of put it together, and then I could give my commentary. And I have been relentless. I'm like, that's not good enough. That's not how you ask it. And I keep going. And I said, listen, it's not a secret. This isn't like a secret project that's for yourself. This is something that's going to go out into the rest of the world, and everybody's going to hear it. So I don't care that I'm like hurting your feelings. I have to make this the best it's going to be, because you're not going to be happy if it's not the best that it can be. And that's also one of my, like, it's never too late. And it could be too late. At some point it is too late, but up until the moment, it's not too late. And I've had situations where we had a reading of a script 2 days before we're going to start shooting, and I'm like, it's not good enough. It's something, it doesn't feel right. And you can't be afraid. You can't be afraid to make a change. And there's an expression that I do not let anybody who works for me ever say it, and nor would I say, is that it's good enough. Good enough doesn't exist. You can't say good enough. It has to be great. You have to put everything into it. And you have to, there's so much that can go, it's not just learning the technicality of it. It's also with entertainment, I think that it's life experience as well. I was an English major. I hate to tell you guys, I never took a film course, but I was an English major. And reading is a tremendous part of filmmaking. And when I say filmmaking, I mean television as well. There are themes that I talk about. I don't even know if you guys would know this, but I learned this in high school, the Apollonian and Dionysian theme. And one is from the heart, Dionysian, and the other is Apollonian, from the head. And I've used that in many conversations, even though I learned it in high school. And you watch many things that you get something out of. And but in everyday life, you really you educate yourself in every which way. But reading is absolutely a tremendous part of entertainment, of filmmaking. There are certain tropes that exist, and you can see that exists now. I'll tell you. So you can have characters like in Breaking Bad, where they're how do you call those characters? Like unlikable, but they're lead. When I was making films, or when I was making TV, when I was making films, you cannot have that. It's very different now. You can have a main character, like in House, where the guy has a drug problem. And they're still the lead of it. In my time, it had to be very specific. And in fact, I did a movie called Copland, and Sylvester Stallone was the star of it, and everybody was used to seeing him as this action character. Besides Rocky, they forget about Rocky. They think of him as action Rambo. And it was a very different part for him, and sort of a weak guy, and the audience would not accept it at the time. Now they would accept it. Now you can be, there's a word for it that I can't think of, but what? An anti-hero. Yeah, an anti-hero. Then now it can exist, and they could be in the front. You know, it's amazing how things have evolved in time. And if you go back to some movies that do work, that I think that movie, as you revisited it, I think it would have even a better opportunity. And then I told Maya this, that if I ever wrote a book, it would be, I've been in the parking lot with everyone, which is, research screenings was a major part of the movie making process, it's just the worst. It's horrible. You screen the movie for an audience, and then when the movie's over, they take a questionnaire and they answer questions, and then about 20 people completely shit on your movie for the next 45 minutes, and you want to kill yourself. It's horrible. And everybody is like a film, and you feel like everybody's gone to film school when they give these critiques. And what Chicago was the best scoring movie ever. So when you have a famous person in the audience, they can't, the filmmakers say it's sly. I did a movie that George Clooney directed called Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. So they can't be in the audience while they're filling out the questionnaire because they're recognizable. So I have to be in a parking lot with these people, and it's very, very nail biting and horrible. You know, sitting there with George. I mean, it's George Clooney, and meanwhile he's still like, "What do you think? What do you think?" And I know it didn't go well. I'm like, I don't know if they're you have to like come up. I mean, there's so much management that goes into that went into it. And I had a friend that lived in LA, and the research screenings would always go late because it was a long time, and I would always call her on my drive home, because we didn't screen in the city usually. It screened at a mall or a more suburban audience. And I would always call her after a research screening, And she said that when I called her after Chicago, she knew it was a hit because she could tell the way I said hello that it went great.
Wow.
And I mean, did anybody ever see the movie Sling Blade? It was a movie Billy Bob Thornton directed and was in. The worst scoring movie ever. Worst ever. And Billy Bob, wow, did he not respond to that? So it's not as glamorous as it all may seem, because even though you're with these celebrities, you're with them not in a truly fun way. You know, it's difficult. And I remember once being on the set of the movie Shall We Dance, and we were on location in Canada, and not in Toronto or Montreal, like not a popular place in Canada. And I'm sitting on a curb in a suburban area eating like a horrible sandwich, and I thought, wow, people should really see how glamorous this life is. And you know, they say the most exciting day of your life is your first day on a set. The most boring day of your life is the second day on a set. So pacing is definitely, you have to think about that. There's just so much that goes into it. Fortunately, I didn't have to be on a set for a long period of time. In terms of creating content, when I was a producer and I wasn't an executive and I got to pick the projects I wanted to do, I often drew from my own personal life. And so I created the show Girlfriend's Guide to Divorce because I was divorced and I wanted to show the good side of divorce, and my parents were very happily married, and I felt that it was really, really important. And so that was my mission when I created that show. And I pitched it to this writer, and she said, okay, great. She said, but I need a book to base it on, not for the content, but for the title. So I just all of a sudden said, how about Girlfriend's Guide to Divorce? And she said, great. There is no book called Girlfriend's Guide to Divorce. Till this day, many people, they all think there's a book. There is no book. And so that was Girlfriend's Guide to Divorce. I Call Your Grandmother, which was the podcast I created. It was after, I had a company that A&E, the network A&E, had financed for me. My deal was over in January. And again, I needed to take a break. I needed some time because I'd consistently been working. When I say take a break, 2 months, 3 months, it's not like a ton of time per se. And you guys, this is a difference. I'll tell you a big difference. You guys, which is great, you value your leisure time, taking vacation days. It's very different now. Like, I never took any days off. Never, as an assistant, never, ever took any days off. So I had taken some time off, and I wanted to be home with my kids when they were in high school. It was really important that I was around then. When they were little, it didn't matter as much. And so I started thinking, and someone had said to me, you really should do a show about your mother. And I said, I'm not doing a show about my mother. I'm not doing a show with my mother. Like, that's not happening. And so I started to think about it because my mother's a real character. And there's a Instagram account that my daughter and my niece created called Illy Grammygram, which means I love you, Grammy. And all the grandchildren would contribute to it because she does like crazy stuff, singing and dancing and whatnot. So I thought about the popularity of the TV show Golden Girls, that people love that, and it still is, like, you guys, like, you're shaking your head that you like it, and skits that were done on SNL, and I thought, people have this affinity, young people, because I know my kids' relationship with my mom, they have a real affinity to their grandmother, and I thought these stories, that their lives that they led, I think that it would be really interesting to hear it, and it would be really fun. The first, it was Jewish grandmothers. And so what was the best way that I could do that? A podcast. And so that's how I got into a podcast. I told you now how I got into I've given you the steps of how I got into television and then into the podcast. So my niece, who was on, she had a deferred year from Brown. I had no staff working for me, and I didn't know how to make up the presentation, I can't think of the word. Anyway.
Treatment?
A treatment, yes, a treatment, thank you. She made a treatment for me. And I called the guy who was the head of Sirius, who I'd worked with previously, and I said, I don't want to meet with you. I said, I want to meet with your podcast person. Can you connect me? And he said, yeah. And he connected me, and I went in there and I said to the guy, I want to learn everything about podcasts. Tell me what's the difference between a podcast and a radio show? And I went through it with him. And then I said, I have a show. I said, I have a treatment for it. I said, but I just want to tell you about it. Just listen. And I told him my take on it and what it would be. And he said to me, you know, I thought that I heard everything, but that is a great idea. So I knew I had a great idea. I was not going to sell it to the first person who reacted to my good idea, because if he thinks it's a good idea, other people will. So I said, okay, thanks a lot. And then it just so happened a couple of days later, a good friend of mine is the head of Spotify. She had been in TV before, Dawn Ostroff, great person, great exec, fantastic person. And she's such a good friend of mine that I forget that she ran Spotify. And at the end of breakfast, I said, oh, by the way, I have a podcast. I don't think it's going to appeal to you, but I don't want you to think I sold it without telling you. I think it's going to sell. And she said, well, tell me what it is. So I told her about it. She goes, I love that. Why would, can you meet with her? Because she was like the head of it. Can you meet with the person who does it? Okay. I met with the person who did it. She was okay, not so impressive. And then I met with the people. I met with the people at iHeart, and this guy that I met with there, in 2 minutes, I said, I'm doing this with you. And it wasn't about the deal. It was him. He was so fantastic, and he helped really shape it and made a great. He's no longer there, of course. He started his own company, but again, it's a feeling that you have. Right away, I said, I want to do this with you. So you have to trust your instincts. And I know people say that, but it really, really is true. That it's not a science. Someone might say, and an example I can give you is, I did a movie, it was a huge comedy, and Drew Barrymore and Ben Stiller were attached to it. And you'd think, that's going to be a hit, comedy with them. And, I didn't feel it from the heart. I was going for my head. And it was a disaster. It was really a disaster. As opposed to other movies where I knew, like Cider House Rules, like I had to make that movie. Even though people were like, who wants to see it? It was very controversial. I put Michael Caine into it, which was, no one couldn't believe that I would do that he was English, but I thought he could play the part, different reasons. I put Jane Alexander, an actress, in it because she had been involved with a lot of, I thought she would be good for publicity for the film when it came out, because she was head of the Arts Commission and like that. So, and that was actually another thing that on that movie, I was watching the daily, and I was pregnant with my daughter at the time, and the movie, if you've seen it, pregnant women, and I'm watching the dailies. I couldn't go to the set. Do you guys know what dailies are? Yeah. But now you can watch them a much better way. I had cassette tapes, put it in, take it out, and I said, they need a shot, a three shot of Paul Rudd, Tobey Maguire, and Charlize. And I said, I don't know where it's going to go. I don't have a place for it, but just to have it just in case. And they always call it the MERYL poster shot, and it is in the movie. So it's you're thinking and also working from your heart. It all comes together. What else should I talk about?
Well, I mean, I want to get into the Q&A portion,
Okay.
but really quick, do you want to tell us more about like the casting process of Chicago? Because I know you had like a big part in that.
So,
with Renee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had done the movie A Price Above Rubies with Renee Zellweger, and I knew her pretty well. That movie shot in New York, so I was with her all the time. And when we were casting the movie, Catherine Zeta-Jones was attached to it for Velma earlier on, because the producer knew her and he was crazy producer, really crazy, and really super crazy. He's gone now, super crazy guy. And I mean, I got so many flowers from this guy because he'd like freak out and start screaming and yelling. Okay, all right, okay, all right, okay, and then of course I get this big thing of flowers. And he'd say, I'm really sorry. He's like, I'm really sorry. I said, you say that every time. So when it came for the role of Roxy, I felt the only person who could do it was Renee. Kate Hudson could do it, but she's not gonna do it because her mother was once attached to it and she didn't get the role. And Reese Witherspoon said that she couldn't sing, but yet she won an Academy Award for a movie where she did sing. But and I felt that Renee had the naivete to be right for the part, and I was adamant about it. I said, I can get a lot of people to play Catherine Zeta-Jones' role, the Velma role, but she is the only one who could play Roxy. And I was very emotional about it, because you have to be fully invested. You do. You have to really be fully invested. It's one of the only times I cried at work that I had to have her. We have to make her deal. I have to have her. But prior to making her deal, I called her agent about her meeting with the director, with Rob Marshall. And she said she doesn't sing and dance, her agent said, and I knew her agent very well. And this is gonna sound so pretentious, but I'll tell you, we made the movie Talented Mr. Ripley, and Anthony Minghella, who was the director, was absolutely one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. And I said to him, because there's a song part of it where Matt and Jude sing a song, and Matt's singing, and I saw Matt sing, you know, I worked with Matt a bunch of times, and I said, how do you know Matt can sing? So he said, if he's a good enough actor, he can act singing. And that's what was in my head. So when I spoke to the agent, I said that to her. I said, she's a good enough actress that she can act singing. And the agent owed me a favor. And I said, you owe me a favor. I said, she just has to come into town and meet with Rob. I said, that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying she has to do the part. She just has to meet with him. And I knew he was charming enough that he would talk her into it. And the end part of it that they brought up that I didn't even realize, that we were in a restaurant. He did some work with her during the day with dancing, which was super fun for her. And because he was a choreographer originally. And that night at dinner, Rob started singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow and got her to start singing it. And she felt so great that it happened. And they pointed out, I didn't even think about it. They just, when I told them this story, they said about that she won the Oscar when she was played Judy Garland, ironically.
Yeah.
And I have to tell her that, actually. I have to bring that up to her. So that's how she got cast. I really wanted Richard Gere because I'd seen, and you have to pay attention to detail, in the movie Pretty Women, which you guys don't watch, but it's iconic for women my age, girls my age.
It's my mom's favorite movie.
Yeah, right. We all saw it like a million times and loved Richard Gere. And in the end, there's a credit that says the music composition by Richard Gere. He like fiddled on the piano a tune of some sort, and he had composed it. So I knew he had some musicality to him. And then in terms of what's her name, Mama.
Latifah.
Yeah, what's the role called? Mama Morton. Rob wanted Kathy Bates, and who he had done Annie with, and I said to him, you know, we're gonna have a lot of arguments, and you're gonna win most of the time. And he did, because I didn't want Catherine Zeta-Jones to have the hairstyle she has in the movie. I'll admit that. Maybe I still don't think I was really wrong about it. So I said, you're gonna win most of the arguments. I said, but this one you're not gonna win. It has to be Queen Latifah. And that's how she got cast in it.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, that's like the end of the talking portion. Let's give her a round of applause. Chicago, and you were talking about In the Heights, and all
I
that
did
sort of
Finding
stuff.
Neverland was a play that was adapted. I think you have to look at what the core of the story is and what the themes are in the play, and that's how you adapt it for a film, for a screenplay. What the themes are.
Yeah, now I know we haven't really talked much about it, but you're a big fan of it. Tell us a bit about Chocolat and the making of that movie and how that went down.
I'm actually not a big fan of that
Oh.
movie, but it was a super successful movie, and I say that when it was big studios, when they make programmers, when they make a Marvel film or an action film, Chocolat was like that for us. And a lot of people think it's a foreign language film. It's not. It's in English. And we were very conscious of the accent that everybody was going to speak in the same accent, the same kind of accent. It was sort of this English accent. And a lot of people thinking because it's called Chocolat, but the movie is entirely in English. and and the director was Lasse Hallström, who I'd worked with on Cider House Rules, and it was we were told like to find a movie about food. That's all, because food movies work. And a woman in my department found the book Chocolat. It was she looked for a movie about it, a book about that, and which is contrary to what I said, but this was a directive from in the company, and I put it together. I cast it with different nationalities so that it had a flavor to it, and if you look at the movies I did with Johnny Depp, I've done 2 movies with Johnny. I did Finding Neverland and Chocolat. He looks super handsome in both my movies. And that's not by accident.
Oh, I love that.
What does that cover?
How did your training in the mailroom at William Morris help you hone the skills that you needed to have as a producer?
You have to be aggressive, you know, and pursue what you want. And so I pursued the cart that was, you know, on the talent floor. And in the mailroom, it's different now. I don't know how you guys learn in the mailroom, because we actually read the mail. We read minutes from meetings. I don't know how it works now.
Wow.
So we've talked a lot about like giving your opinion and being straight up. Would you say that that's like the most important thing that you've learned, or what piece of advice have you really taken to?
My piece of advice is really not to accept mediocrity. I don't want to accept mediocrity. You know, there are people in the business who will accept it. I don't want to accept it. And so you never give up. And you try every which way, and unorthodox ways of doing it, and you also can I just thought of something that came into my mind. You know, I did Night Shyamalan's first movie. It wasn't that movie. It was a movie called Wide Awake, and it was about a boy and his relationship with his grandfather. And the reason I wanted to make the movie was because of my relationship with my grandfather. And we had a situation with a DP that was on the movie that was from India, and he was paralyzed on one side. It was a disaster, and we had to replace him. And it was a super difficult conversation to have with Night, but we had to do it.
And then I guess like the last question from us, and then we'll open it up to the audience, is how has your Jewish identity or your identity like as a woman in like a predominantly male industry, at least like at the time, I would still say even today, how did you like navigate that like coming up in your career, and also like how did it shape what projects you worked on, or how you maybe worked on?
I didn't, only with the TV department did I feel that it was all male. I know that other people may feel differently than I do, but I think that how I was raised, and maybe in a Jewish family, you know, I was raised, my brother had his talents, and my brother's very famous and successful. He's Randall Poster, the music supervisor, and he was very smart academically. I was more outgoing, and my parents really recognized our attributes. You know, they'd say, well, he's this, but you're that. And I would help him on this, and you help him on that. And I raised my own kids the same way. And so I think that's a Jewish, I think that's a Jewish kind of thing. And then as a woman, I can tell you that I was one of the first women. I was a woman in power, and at a young age, and I felt a lot of responsibility that I was setting a lot of precedent. And when I went on maternity leave, both times I took, and everyone's always surprised when I say this, I took my entire 3-month maternity leave, because I was setting a precedent for other women, and I was not going to do that to them.
Wow.
So both times I did that. And I also had it in my contract that my daughter, when she was a baby, could travel. If I had to travel more than 3 days, that she could come with my nanny. I built a lot of things into my contract.
That's amazing. All right, who has questions from the audience?
You kind of talked about the idea of not accepting good enough, but especially in like artistic and creative fields, people can run into like roadblocks where you're like scared to put things out into the world because of fear of it not
Right.
being perfect. So like, how do you balance the idea of it not not taking good enough as an answer, but also not stalling yourself because things have to be perfect.
Well, it's a communal, I'm like, it's a communal process. And, you know, you should, even if you don't think it's perfect, but you have the same way we had our research group and the focus group, in a smaller way, you know, you show it to people. I used to do that. I used to have my own research group in my house with my kids and with friends or different people. And they can give you constructive criticism and advice. And so you don't have to be afraid to bring it out. It's people that you trust and that you think are smart. And always try to find someone who's smarter than you.
So like you mentioned a lot like being relentless and like really like getting your foot in the door, especially when you're starting out. I know like a lot of us are just starting out in our own internships. And like we do hear a lot that like yes, you need to be like asking to be in every meeting and you need to be like on people's case to really get involved. But like where do you think you draw the line between like wanting to be part of it and like being annoying or like
That would
needing to
annoy
pay your
me.
dues?
That would annoy me if an intern did that, to be quite honest with you. You have, it's by osmosis that you learn. And you, as an intern, you can't ask for something like that. I don't believe. One of my interns, I'm very proud. She is the youngest promoted agent at William Morris ever.
Wow.
And she, when I was on the phone late, and I'd say to her, you know, and there was another intern there too who was great, who went to USC actually, Marissa Feld, great girl. And I'd say to them, you know, go home, you don't have to stay here. And they said, no, we want to listen. You know, it's the people who say, oh, can I leave now? That's not going to work. And as an intern, they saw it as an opportunity, and they took the opportunity, and they didn't see it as a drag, and they wanted to read everything, and they anything that they could do, they did. But I also want to say, and this might be contrary, is that when I mean, I don't know if you guys are creatives, it's different, but as an executive, I don't like hiring people that have 20 million internships and never had a real job. I respect people more who've been a counselor at camp, who've been a waiter, all the types of jobs that you really have to work hard, because a lot of internships are bullshit. And you sit around, you know, it's unfortunate, but you sit around and you don't do anything, and it's not your fault. It's the people that you're working for aren't going to take the time because they're so busy or whatever it is. And often an intern is really working for the assistant and not for the executive.
Any other questions? Yeah.
So personally, as someone who has interests in multiple different fields of media, and for you, who's someone who's worked in the different fields from television, podcasting, I find myself in a position now struggling to figure out like which path I want to focus on now specifically, especially now looking for internships and stuff. So what's your advice in terms of navigating, picking
Which one do you feel most attached to? Which one are you most interested in doing? At the time that I did a podcast, it was something I hadn't conquered, and so I wanted to do a podcast. I had the best time doing Mob Wives, and you would be shocked, but I loved it. It was so, I had great time when I did Unscripted, you know, when I did Project Runway and Project Runway All-Stars, and that was another situation on Project Runway All-Stars, when I hired Isaac Mizrahi to be a judge. He'd been in 3 failed fashion TV shows, and I got a lot of flack for hiring him. And I said, you know, it just wasn't the right thing. This is the right thing.
I was interested in your experience on working in Good Will Hunting, like how you came to work on the project, and like if you have any interesting stories.
And I've had any interesting stories about Good Will Hunting?
Yeah.
Well, I oversaw, I wasn't on the movie day to day. And the script came in, it had been in development in another place, and the script came in, and this guy that I mentioned on Sunday that worked for me, John Gordon, who started as my intern, and ultimately became my co-president of production.
Wow.
And he was really the one who championed the project. But I mean, I was certainly involved with it. I have a funny. Oh God. I very closely monitored. I had to closely monitor the budget of the movie, and I don't know why, I was getting these bills from Matt and Ben that they were like spending a fortune in the minibar in the hotel. And I actually called them and I said, you know, you can't spend, you can go down and go to a bodega and buy the stuff that you want, and you don't need to take it from the minibar. And they said, Meryl, you know, we're actually writing at night. You forget that we're writing at night. I said, no, I didn't forget. I said, you can get it at some point. And then, you know, then they became huge stars. I was in Project Greenlight with them, if anybody ever sees that. And you can see how they talk to me that. And years later, I was at the premiere of Argo. And I saw Ben and I saw Matt. And we're talking, and they said, I can't believe you fucking called us about
Yeah?
As someone you weren't expecting to go into entertainment industry originally, are you totally, and did you allow yourself to just be consumed by your work? And if not, how do you put a career second sometimes? How do you say no?
You can't put this second.
Okay.
I wasn't even aware that I was consumed by it.
Okay.
And that's the difference, I think, between your generation and mine. We didn't have cell phones. We had to sit in the office waiting for phone calls till 11:30 at night, or 12, or whatever time it was. And to be in the entertainment business is 24/7, and you don't even think about it. And if you don't feel that, you should definitely not go into it. I think it has to be that. It's not that I think. I'm telling you, you don't even think about it. It just is. It is what it is. It doesn't end. It's not a 9-to-5 job, because you're dealing with a lot of personalities, idiosyncratic personalities, not rational personalities, and you know, and rewrites, you know, on a Saturday, on a Sunday. I mean, it is all consuming.
So I know I want to draw on a comment you mentioned earlier about a lot of the internships that people get today can sometimes be bullshit. And you were telling us about some of your experience with some of the interns that you've had who have gone on to do very successful things. What is the type of experience that you give an intern to make it a worthwhile experience, and how do you foster their learning, and like what
When I had big executive jobs, the intern essentially worked for my assistant. And actually, this girl that was my intern for 2 summers, we called her Squirt. She's an executive. She'll kill me that I told you that, but she's Annapurna now. And she's a TV executive, successful TV executive. And I had breakfast with her like 2 years ago or something. And I'd never been one-on-one with her like that before. And she told me that the assistant, Kelly, who's now Jessica Chastain's producing partner, that Kelly would only let her ask 1 question a day. And I said, that is so mean. I can't believe that she did that to you. But now, you know, they really monitor intern situations. A lot of people won't hire interns because there are laws governing it. It's not the same way. So tell me, I got lost, Jordan. Tell me again. Ask me again, I mean. What do they do for me?
Or what experience do you think that when somebody's interning with you, that it's very worthwhile for them, as opposed to some of the other internships
Like
where it's kind of a BS title type of thing?
Well, you've just heard me speak. I think that speaks volumes about my style.
It does.
It does. And you have to be willing to do anything also at the same time. This girl's Squirt, she said to me that she takes her iced coffee dark with skim milk, because that's how I took my iced coffee, and she would get it for me every day, and she always got 2 just in case, and then she drank the other one.
Oh wow.
Or she'd always bring an extra shirt because it was in the summer, and if she had to go on an errand that she'd be sweating, and she'd have another shirt to change into.
Wow.
Mm.
Oh my gosh. Any last questions?
Yeah.
We'll do 2.
How do you manage between business and art, like when you take decisions? When it comes to budget, to everything.
It's the Apollonian and Dionysian element. That's exactly what it is. Certain parts are business and certain parts are art, but you have to find the right combination of them.
And then Daisy, you'll get our last question.
Oh wow, this is a lot of pressure.
what was one of your favorite projects that didn't come into fruition? Like that didn't
That
make
didn't
it?
get made?
Yeah.
Not in the Heights, right? We're not gonna, not that.
Yeah.
You know, most of the projects I wanted to get made really did get made. I can't think of something I really wanted to make. I have projects now that I really want to get made that will happen at some point.
Wow. I love it. And then really quickly, favorite project to work on in the past?
Beautiful Girls.
Beautiful Girls. Nice. All right. I think that concludes our little Q&A.
Yeah.